Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the story of Google. You know, a company that started with two students who had this completely wild idea to organize literally everything we know.
And that's really the big question here, isn't it? I mean, how do you go from a cluttered dorm room to a company that has totally reshaped, well, pretty much everything about our world? It's an incredible journey.
All right, so our story doesn't start in some fancy boardroom. Nope. It starts on the campus of Stanford University back in the mid-90s. This is where the spark, the core idea behind Google, was actually born.
Okay, so you have to remember, finding anything online back then was a mess. It was chaos. Search engines just counted how many times a word was on a page. It really didn't work very well. But these two Stanford students, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, they saw the problem and they thought, we can do better. And boy, did they. So this was their big breakthrough. It was called PageRank, and the idea was pure genius. Instead of just counting words, they looked at the relationships between pages. They realized a link from one page to another was like a vote of confidence. And if a really important page linked to you, that was a huge vote. It was just like citations in a research paper. They actually called it backrub. Yeah, backrub, because it analyzed the web's backlinks. And get this, they ran it on all this cobbled together hardware, with server racks literally made out of Lego-style bricks. And it was so powerful, it ate up almost half of Stanford's entire internet bandwidth. Right away, it was obvious their results were just worlds better than competitors like Excite. They knew they were onto something huge.
So you've got this amazing project, but how do you turn it into a real company? Well, the next chapter of the story takes place in what's now a legendary Silicon Valley garage.
And things moved so fast, it's almost hard to believe. That first check for $100,000, it was written out to Google Inc. The only problem was, Google Inc. didn't exist yet. They had to rush to incorporate the company just so they could cash the check. And then, less than a year later, they've got $25 million from top VCs. Just wow. And the name itself, Google, it's actually a play on the word Google. That's the number 1 followed by 100 zeros. Right from the very beginning, this name was a signal of their massive ambition. They weren't just building a search engine. They were trying to index a nearly infinite amount of information. Now, here's one of those moments that could have changed everything. In 1999, Page and Brin actually tried to sell Google to their competitor, Excite, for just $750,000. And Excite said, no. The CEO just didn't see the value. Can you imagine? It's got to be one of the biggest what-ifs in tech history. Okay, so they survived that near sale, but now they had a new problem. They had the best search technology on the planet, but they had absolutely no way to make money. Their solution, though, was brilliant. And here's the key. At a time when everyone else was throwing these flashy, annoying pop-up ads all over the place, Google went in the complete opposite direction. They used simple, text-only ads. But the genius part was, the ads were directly related to what you were searching for. They actually made advertising useful. This built incredible loyalty, and, well, it also generated massive amounts of revenue. As they got ready to go public, they did something pretty unusual. They took their informal motto, "Don't be evil," and wrote it right into their legal IPO documents. It was this huge public declaration, a promise that they were going to prioritize doing good over just making a quick buck. And what did that IPO get them? $23 billion. That was their market value right after going public in August 2004. The IPO made hundreds of employees into millionaires overnight, and it cemented Google's place as an absolute giant in the tech world. So with all that money in the bank, Google went on a serious expansion tear. Their mission was no longer just about organizing web pages. Now it was about organizing all the world's information in every possible form. And this expansion happened fast. First, they applied their search tech to news. Then came Gmail with a whole gigabyte of free storage, which was just unheard of back then. Then, Google Maps completely changed how we find our way around. And then Chrome jumped into the browser wars and quickly took over. Each new thing just woes Google deeper and deeper into the fabric of our lives. You know, this is how you know you've really made it. When your company's name becomes a verb that everybody uses every single day. In 2006, to Google something was officially added to the dictionary. You're not just a company anymore. You're the default way the world finds information.
But you know how this story goes. With all that power comes a whole lot of responsibility and a whole lot of scrutiny. And that brings us to the much more complicated modern era of the company. This was a huge move. They basically created a new parent company, Alphabet, to oversee everything. Google would still be the search and ads business, but Alphabet would handle all the other stuff. We're talking self-driving cars, life sciences, you name it. It was a sign that they had outgrown just being a search company. And then the tide started to turn. The pressures just began to build from the inside and the outside. You had this massive employee walkout in 2018 showing some serious cracks internally. And then the legal challenges started piling up, with the Department of Justice taking a very, very close look at their business practices.
Which brings us to today and this modern reckoning. The very thing that made Google so powerful, its complete dominance, is now its biggest problem. It's facing accusations that it's a monopoly that stifles competition and has way too much control over what we see and do online.
And it really does bring the whole story full circle, doesn't it? The mission was to bring order to the chaos of the web. But now the big question is whether the order they created is just a different kind of chaos, one controlled by a single, incredibly powerful company. And that really is the question for Google's next chapter. It's a journey that mirrors the evolution of the internet itself, from a Stanford project to a global superpower. What happens next? Well, that's a story that is still being written.